My union rep found me by the time clock. Leo grabbed the plastic-sheathed ID clipped to my belt, his knuckles brushing the worn denim of my jeans, and the contact sent a jolt straight up my spine. He unclipped it with a practiced flick of his thumb, holding it between two calloused fingers. His own badge read, Leo Martinez, shop steward, the photo a grim, unsmiling version of the man who now stood entirely too close in the cacophony of the end-of-shift bell. He was broad-shouldered and solid, a man who looked like he could stop one of the stamping machines with a well-placed shove. He smelled of industrial soap, faint machine oil, and something else, a cheap, sharp cologne that on anyone else would have been offensive, but on him, it was just another part of the landscape of my long-held, secret fascination. 5 minutes, us, he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the surrounding noise of men shouting greetings and curses as they swarmed the clock. He didn't wait for an answer. He just pocketed my badge and turned, expecting me to follow. And I did. Of course I did. For 2 years, I had watched Leo Martinez from the safe distance of my station on the line. I watched him mediate disputes with the foreman, his jaw set, his stance unwavering. I watched him explain insurance paperwork to new hires, his voice patient, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he pointed to the correct lines to sign. I watched him, and I built him into something monumental in the quiet, lonely space of my mind. He was a bastion of calm authority in a world of loud noises and repetitive motion, and he had never said more than a handful of words to me. Until now. He led me away from the throng, past the grimy break room with its lingering smell of burnt coffee and microwaved soup, and into the small, closet-sized office reserved for union business. It was little more than a metal desk, 2 mismatched chairs, and a filing cabinet overflowing with papers. A single, fly-specked fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow-green glow. Leo didn't bother turning on the main light. He just closed the door, plunging us into a kind of shared twilight. The noise of the factory floor became a distant, muffled roar. He didn't sit. He leaned his hip against the edge of the desk, crossing his arms over his chest. The posture stretched the fabric of his dark blue work shirt, emphasizing the solid build I knew so well from afar. Up close, it was overwhelming. I could see the faint lines around his eyes, the dark stubble shadowing his jaw. He was older than me, maybe by 10 years. Old enough to have a weariness about him that wasn't cynical, just lived in. There's a grievance, he started, his gaze direct and unervingly steady. Filed under your name. About the overtime allocation on line 3-inch. I blinked. My heart, which had been hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, gave a confused flutter. I didn't file a grievance. A corner of his mouth ticked upward, not quite a smile, but a ghost of one. I know. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with unspoken things. I stood awkwardly in the middle of the tiny room, my hands shoved deep into my pockets. I am a master of observation, of analysis from a distance. But here, in his proximity, my mind was a blank slate. All I could focus on was the rhythm of his breathing, the way the cheap light caught the silver threads in his black hair, the sheer, undeniable fact of his presence. He was real. Not just a figure I watched across the concrete floor. He finally pushed off the desk, taking a step toward me. My instinct was to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. My back was already inches from the door. He stopped, leaving a foot of charged air between us. He still had my badge. He pulled it from his pocket, the plastic warm from his body, and held it out. So, he said, his voice even lower now, a conspiratorial murmur. Why haven't you? Why haven't I what? My own voice was thin, reedy. Filed a grievance. I've seen the overtime sheets. Foreman's been skipping you for a month. Giving the hours to his cousin's kid. Of course he'd seen it. Leo saw everything. That was his job. I just shrugged, my shoulders tight with tension. Don't like to make trouble. It was the truest thing I could say. My entire life was a carefully constructed exercise in not making trouble, in being as unnoticeable as possible. He studied my face, his dark eyes seeming to catalog every flicker of anxiety, every nervous tick. I felt pinned by his attention, exposed. Sometimes, he said slowly, trouble is the only way to get what you're owed. He held my badge out a little further. I reached for it, my fingers clumsy. As I took it, his fingers brushed against mine. It wasn't an accident. His touch was deliberate, a brief, firm pressure that sent another shockwave through my system. His skin was rough, calloused, yet impossibly warm. He didn't pull back immediately. His gaze dropped to our hands, then lifted back to my eyes. A question hung in the air, but I had no idea what it was. Then he let go. The moment was over. "Think about it, Julian," he said, using my name for the first time. It sounded different in his mouth. Solid. Real. "If you want a file, you come see me. We'll take care of it." He opened the door, and the roar of the factory rushed back in. He nodded once, a sharp, dismissive gesture, and walked away, disappearing into the river of men heading for the parking lot. I stood there for a long moment, my warm badge clutched in my hand, my mind reeling. The encounter had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it had completely dismantled the quiet, orderly world I had built for myself. He'd used a bogus grievance as a pretense. He had noticed me, and he had touched me. The next few weeks were a special kind of torture. I became hyper-aware of him, my internal Leo radar tuned to its highest frequency. I'd feel the weight of his gaze from across the floor and look up to find him watching me, his expression unreadable, before he'd turn away to talk to someone else. Once, he walked past my station and his hand brushed my back, a fleeting, casual contact that felt like a brand. I almost fumbled the piece of metal I was machining, my hands suddenly slick with sweat. I analyzed every non-interaction. The way he'd nod at me in the morning, a gesture he didn't afford everyone. The time he was in the break room and left the last clean mug by the coffee pot, his eyes flicking to me just before he walked out. I was losing my mind, building a cathedral of hope on a foundation of sand. It was probably all in my head. He was a good union rep, looking out for a quiet member of his flock. That was all. It had to be. The mandatory safety seminar was announced on a Tuesday, a full weekend, at a budget motel 2 hours out of town with a conference room that smelled like stale beer and desperation. Attendance was not optional. My first thought was a dull dread at the idea of forced socializing with my coworkers. My second thought, a secret, thrilling pulse of anticipation, was that Leo would be there. He was running the damn thing. I drove myself, preferring the solitude of my beat-up car to the loud camaraderie of the shared vans. I checked in, got my key to a room with a brown and orange bedspread that looked like it had witnessed several crimes, and immediately wanted to go home. The first session was a mind-numbing PowerPoint presentation on lockout/tagout procedures. I sat in the back, nursing a cup of watery coffee, trying to become one with the beige wallpaper. Leo was at the front of the room, looking out of place in a collared shirt. He commanded the space effortlessly, his voice calm and clear, fielding questions with an easy confidence. I tried not to stare, but it was useless. He was a magnetic pole, and I was just a pile of iron filings. That evening, a mixer was scheduled by the sad, kidney-shaped pool. It consisted of warm beer in a cooler and a few bags of chips. I made a brief appearance, exchanged awkward nods with a few guys from the line, and escaped. I couldn't stand the performance of it all, the forced bonhomie. I walked around the back of the motel, where the parking lot gave way to a scrubby patch of woods. The air was cool and smelled of pine and damp earth. I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me and tensed, my whole body going rigid. "Hiding," Leo's voice. I didn't turn around. I just watched my breath mist in the chilly air. Just getting some air. He came to stand beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. He wasn't drinking a beer. He just had his hands in his pockets, jingling his keys. We stood in silence for a long time, looking out at the dark trees. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was full. It felt like a conversation was happening in the space between us. "You're always doing that," he said finally, his voice soft. "Doing what?" "Making yourself small. Finding the quiet corner. Like you're trying to disappear." I am trying to disappear." The thought was so loud in my head, I was afraid I'd said it out loud. I just shrugged. "Not much of a people person." "Me neither," he said, and it was so unexpected that I actually turned to look at him. His face was in shadow, but I could see the faint outline of his profile against the motel's security lights. "I'm good at it. The talking, the handshaking. It's a tool. Like a wrench. You use it to get the job done. But I'd rather be here." He gestured vaguely at the quiet dark. "Or home. With a book." It was the first truly personal thing he'd ever said to me. A crack in the stoic, capable facade. He was revealing a piece of himself, and I felt a sudden, dizzying urge to offer a piece of my own in return. But I didn't know how. The muscles for that kind of vulnerability had atrophied in me years ago. So, he said, changing the subject, but the intimacy of his confession still lingered in the air. Did you think about that grievance? Yeah. And I'm still thinking. He made a low sound in his throat, a hum of something that might have been amusement or frustration. Julian, you think too much. Some things you just have to do. He took a step closer, and my breath hitched. He reached out, not to touch my shoulder or my back, but my arm. His fingers wrapped around my bicep, his thumb pressing gently into the muscle there. The contact was electric, a direct line to every nerve ending in my body. You let people walk all over you, he murmured, his voice a gravelly whisper. At work. Here. You just let them. Why? I can't speak. My throat is tight, my mind a roaring static. His hand is still on my arm, a warm, heavy weight. His question hangs between us, a genuine inquiry. He wants to know. He sees me. He sees the way I fold myself into corners, the way I absorb the casual slights, the way I make myself invisible. And he's asking why. Before I can find the words, a shout comes from the direction of the pool. One of the guys from line 2, drunk and loud. Hey Martinez, Foreman's looking for you. Says the beer's all gone. Leo's hand dropped from my arm, and the loss of contact was a physical ache. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. Duty calls. He looked at me, his eyes dark and serious in the gloom. Don't disappear tonight, okay? Stick around. He walked away without another word, leaving me alone with the scent of pine and the ghost of his touch on my skin. I didn't go back to the party, but I didn't go back to my room, either. I stayed out there for another hour, my mind replaying his words, his touch, the unexpected vulnerability in his voice. He had invited me to stay, to be present. It felt like the most significant invitation I had ever received. The next day, the tension was a wire pulled taut between us. During a breakout session on hazard communication, we were assigned to the same small group. We sat at a round table with 3 other guys, shoulder to shoulder. His knee brushed against mine under the table, and neither of us moved. It was a constant, steady point of contact, a secret conversation happening in plain sight. I couldn't focus on the presentation. All I could feel was the warmth of his leg against mine, the solid presence of him beside me. The tipping point came during the lunch break. I was getting a soda from the vending machine in the lobby when Rick, a notoriously loud-mouthed welder with a chip on his shoulder, cornered me. He'd had it out for me for months, for no reason I could discern other than my quietness, which he seemed to interpret as arrogance or weakness. Well, he said, leaning against the machine and blocking my escape. Look who it is. The ghost of the factory. You enjoying your little vacation? It's fine, Rick, I said, keeping my eyes on the can of soda dropping into the slot. You know, some of us were talking, he went on, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, mocking tone. We can't figure you out. No wife, no girlfriend. Never talk about anything. You're a real mystery. Or maybe not such a mystery, huh? He smirked, a cruel, ugly twisting of his lips. Maybe you're just not interested in the things normal guys are interested in. A cold dread washed over me. It was the old, familiar fear. The fear of being seen, of being named, of being targeted. I grabbed my soda, my hand shaking slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do. That's enough, Rick. Leo's voice. It came from behind me, low and cold as steel. It didn't carry anger, but something far more chilling, absolute authority. Rick's smirk vanished. He straightened up, his bluster deflating like a punctured tire. Just having a conversation, Leo, he mumbled, suddenly unable to meet Leo's eyes. No, Leo said, taking a step forward so he was standing just beside me. You were running your mouth. And now you're going to walk away. Rick looked from Leo's stony face to mine and back again. He opened his mouth as if to say something else, then thought better of it. He just grunted and stalked off toward the conference room. The silence he left behind was deafening. I stared at the soda can in my hand, unable to look at Leo. I felt stripped bare, my carefully constructed walls of invisibility torn down. He had heard. He knew. You okay? He asked, his voice back to its normal register, but laced with a concern that felt intensely personal. I nodded, A jerky, unconvincing movement. Fine. He's an ass, Leo said. It was a simple statement of fact. He put his hand on my shoulder, his thumb rubbing a small, soothing circle just above my collarbone. Don't let him get to you. He doesn't know a damn thing. I finally looked up at him. His eyes were soft, the hard edge gone. He was looking at me, really looking, and there was no judgment there. Only a quiet, steady strength that felt like a lifeline. He saw me, all of me, and he wasn't turning away. In that moment, something inside me, something I had kept locked down for years, began to fracture. That night, after the final dinner, I couldn't face my empty room. I found myself back at the spot behind the motel, by the edge of the woods. I didn't know if he would come, but I had to try. I had to know if what I saw in his eyes was real. I only waited 10 minutes. He appeared out of the darkness as if summoned, moving with a quiet confidence that never failed to steal my breath. He didn't say anything. He just came and stood in front of me, his presence filling my entire world. The air between us crackled, thick with everything that had passed, the bogus grievance, the lingering touches, the shared silence, the quiet defense in the lobby. You look at me sometimes, he said, his voice a low rumble, like you're trying to read a book in a language you don't quite know. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The precipice. I started, but my voice failed. What could I possibly say? I've been in love with a fantasy of you for 2 years. Seeing the real you is so much better, and it's terrifying me. He took another step, closing the last of the distance between us. He raised his hand, not to my shoulder this time, but to my face. His rough palm cupped my cheek, his thumb stroking the line of my jaw. The gesture was so tender, so impossibly gentle, it broke me. My voice was a raw whisper, full of a desperate, long-suppressed honesty. I feel safer when you're around. It was the most I could offer, a sliver of the truth. But it was enough. A flicker of something, understanding, relief, a deep and profound recognition, passed through his eyes. He searched my face for a long moment, and for the first time, his expression was completely open, completely readable. It was filled with the same desperate yearning I felt radiating from my own body. Good, he breathed. That's good, Julian. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of frantic passion or pent-up lust. It was slow and deep and sure. It was a kiss that spoke of patience, of waiting, of finally arriving at a destination you weren't sure you'd ever find. His lips were firm and warm, and he tasted faintly of coffee and mint. His other hand came up to cradle the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me steady as my world tilted on its axis. I melted into him, my hands coming up to grip his shirt, holding on like a drowning man. It felt like coming home, like a lock clicking into place. It was the first honest breath I'd taken in years. When he finally pulled back, he didn't go far. He rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the cold night air. His eyes were closed. Been wanting to do that, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, for a very long time. My mind, usually a hive of overthinking and anxiety, was blessedly, beautifully silent. There was only the feeling of his forehead against mine, the solid weight of his hands on me, the steady rhythm of his breathing. For a very long time, the words echoed in the quiet space he had created. He had been watching me, too. The drive back to the city the next day was surreal. The world outside my windshield looked the same, but everything inside me had been fundamentally rearranged. Back at my small, quiet apartment, the silence felt different. It wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of anticipation. Monday at the factory was agony. The noise, the smells, the routine, it all felt alien. I was a different person than the one who had clocked out on Friday. I saw him once, from a distance, talking to the foreman. He met my eyes across the vast, echoing space. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. But the hours crawled by, and with every passing minute, a cold seed of doubt began to sprout. What if it was a mistake? A weekend aberration, fueled by cheap beer and motel anonymity? What if he regretted it? Back in the harsh fluorescent light of the real world, maybe it would all crumble to dust. By the time the end-of-shift bell rang, I was a wreck, my stomach a knot of pure anxiety. I practically ran to the time clock, desperate to escape, to go home and lick my wounds in private. I didn't even look for him. I just wanted out. I fumbled with my keys in the parking lot, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them on the greasy asphalt. As I bent to retrieve them, a pair of worn work boots appeared in my line of sight. I straightened up slowly. Leo was standing there, his expression calm, his hands in his pockets. He just watched me, letting the silence stretch. My heart was doing a frantic, painful dance against my ribs. "My place," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A quiet command. "For dinner." Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees almost buckled. It was real. He wasn't running. He was waiting. I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. "Follow me," he said, and turned to walk toward a slightly dented but clean pickup truck parked a few rows over. His apartment was on the third floor of a nondescript brick building in a quiet, working-class neighborhood. It was small, but it was immaculate. The floors were polished wood, the furniture was old but well cared for, and bookshelves overflowed with worn paperbacks. It smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper. It was a home, a real, lived-in space. It was nothing like I expected and everything I should have known. He gestured toward a comfortable-looking armchair. "Have a seat." "Beer." I sat, feeling large and awkward in his space. "Sure. Thanks." He came back from the small kitchen with 2 bottles, handing one to me. Our fingers brushed again, and this time, the jolt was familiar, a welcome current. He didn't sit. He leaned against the doorframe, watching me in that same steady, unnerving way. The internal test began. My old fears, my ingrained habits of self-preservation, were screaming at me to bolt, to protect myself from this fragile, terrifying hope. "So," I said, just to break the silence. "What's for dinner?" He smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that lit up his entire face. It was the first time I'd seen it. It was devastating. "I'm a terrible cook. I was hoping you'd be okay with pizza." "Pizza is good," I said, my own lips twitching into a nervous smile. "Pizza is great." We ordered the pizza, and while we waited, we talked. Or rather, he did. He asked me questions. Not about work, but about me. What music I liked. What books I read. Where I grew up. He listened, really listened, his dark eyes focused on me, making me feel like I was the only person in the world. And slowly, hesitantly, I started to talk. I told him about my quiet life, my love of old movies, my failed attempt at community college. I told him things I hadn't told anyone. He confessed he'd orchestrated the whole grievance thing. "I had to talk to you," he said, his voice low. "I'd been watching you for months. The way you kept to yourself. The way you'd get this look on your face when you were concentrating on your work. I just needed to know who you were." He shook his head, looking down at his beer bottle. "It was a clumsy plan." "It worked," I whispered. "Yeah," he said, looking up, his eyes meeting mine. "It worked." The pizza arrived, and we ate it sitting on his couch, our shoulders brushing. The television was off. There was just the sound of us eating, the occasional clink of a bottle on the coffee table. It was the most comfortable silence I had ever experienced. The fear was finally receding, replaced by a quiet, burgeoning warmth in my chest. This was real. This was happening. After we finished, I helped him clear the boxes. We stood side by side at his kitchen sink, and the simple, domestic intimacy of it was more profound than any kiss. This was the future I never let myself dream of. A quiet evening, a shared meal, a comfortable presence. Later, we sat on the couch again, a comfortable foot of space between us. He picked up a book from the end table, and I just watched him. I watched the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the way his thumb absently traced the edge of the page. The grinding loneliness that had been my constant companion for as long as I could remember was gone. In its place was a quiet hum of contentment. He must have felt my gaze, because he looked up from his book. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, and then he closed the book, setting it aside. He shifted on the couch, closing the space between us. He took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine, his calloused palm warm and solid against my own. He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a soft, gentle kiss to my knuckles. He kept his eyes on mine as he did it, his gaze full of a promise I was finally ready to believe. I looked at this man, this solid, steady man who had seen me when I thought I was invisible. He hadn't tried to fix me or change me. He had just made space for me, quietly and patiently, until I was ready to step into it. The journey had been a slow, terrifying crawl out of the shadows, But I wasn't alone anymore. I looked around his small, quiet apartment, at the worn armchair and the overflowing bookshelves, at his hand holding mine, and a single, profound thought settled in my soul. I was home.